Buongiorno, signori e signore, amici colleghi, friends, Romans and countrymen. It's a very great pleasure to see you again, some of you, or maybe some new members of the audience, and it's a real pleasure for us, the British School at Rome, to be able to continue our participation in Shakespeare 2016 Memory of Rome with this lecture by Roy Stephenson, who's the head of Archaeological Collections and Archives at the Museum of London. The British School at Rome and the Museum of London have a close connection. We have a memorandum of understanding together, which is in, I think, its 7th year. And we've been able to find various ways of exchanging ideas between us around, for instance, the fact that both London and Rome have significant Roman ports, and also about the museological strengths of the Museum of London. If anybody hasn't been, I recommend the Museum of London to you as a shining example of how to bring a highly academically informed collection to a broad general public in the lightest and best possible way. It's one of the most enjoyable museums to visit that I know. Roy's long connection with the Museum of London has extended across the period when the Museum of London was, for a little while, just about the biggest archaeological player in London, and it continues to be an extraordinarily important institution for our understanding of the history through material culture of the capital city of Great Britain. Looking at the range of the Museum of London, it goes all the way from pre-Roman period, a strong Roman presence, but right the way through to the contemporary period. And their exhibitions, for instance, on the Great Fire or on the Cheapside Hoard, have really brought to light the ways in which we can begin to understand early modern London as an extraordinarily significant and very, very interesting capital city. And it's obviously absolutely appropriate as we think about Shakespeare, who spent a goodly part of his life in London, that we should have a look at the material culture of London and how Shakespeare's London informed his work and his art. So without further ado, I will passo la parola a Roy, with many thanks for his finding time to come over here. It's brilliant to have you with us again, Roy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your warm welcome. I come to Rome for the good catering and the nice company. Thank you. Oh, and I'll give a lecture as well. Chris kind of set me up really well. I'm the head of the Archaeological Collections and Archive at the Museum of London. If you subscribe to things like the Guinness Book of Records, we're in it. All of the archaeological material that's collected in London ends up at the Museum of London, which gives us a huge range of material to think about. It's not at the level of Rome in terms of monuments that stand above the ground, but today I wanted to think about what London would have looked like, what Roman London would have looked like to Shakespeare. So we're kind of looking at, I'm trying to look through the eyes of Shakespeare at the time. And then, of course, there's a couple of really rather hazy lenses that we have to look through. One of which is the Great Fire of London, 1666, the 350th anniversary of which is this September. Our exhibition opens in July. Book tickets now. Only joking. So we lose a large portion of the centre of the City of London at this time. So that's one hazy lens that we have to deal with. Another view, which is the Utrecht panorama, which is a before and after of the Great Fire of London. So if you see St Paul's Cathedral with roof, Paul's Cathedral without a roof, so it's wrecked in 1666, which actually leads to some haziness. And the other event that gives us rather an opaque view is enemy action in the 1940s, and this is from the London County Council bomb damage map. So the area that Shakespeare would have lived in Shoreditch. Purple means buildings destroyed totally. So you can see great big swathes of damage that have been carried out to the City of London, around the port area, obviously, and of course to the east and the docks. There's a great deal of damage. So that is one of the things that gives us a dark lens. But actually, the other thing that, as a result of the enemy action in the 1940s, is the rather dubious redevelopment that comes after it. So you could say the damage was done by the planners at the time rather than Luftwaffe. So where am I coming from in terms of Shakespeare? About a year and a half ago, I had a phone call from Greg Doran. I don't know whether you know, who's the artistic director of the Royal Shakespeare Company, and he was just coming to the end of a run of Henry V. We were starting the rehearsals for Henry IV, and he said, "Roy, we're putting on this play. We're going to do it as if it was set in the time that it was written." So it had a 16th century view of the material culture. So Henry IV, actually mid-15th century, so he doesn't want to know about late medieval, he wants to know about early modern material culture. And I don't know if any of you come across Greg Doran, and he's a meticulous Shakespeare scholar. So he and the company analysed Henry IV to the lowest level, the most common. He unpicked the play from a material culture point of view and had unanswered questions about the things, the stuff of the period. So we had the casting. We did what in effect was a huge handling session for the cast of Henry IV, parts 1 and 2. So we see Tony Sher as Falstaff. He got to handle the type of material culture that Falstaff would have drunk from in the Boar's Head Tavern. They couldn't help but perform. Prince Hal and Jasper Britton as Henry IV, and we had a great morning. It was absolutely fabulous. But actually, this is the sort of the point where I started thinking, well, you know, we've got the stuff of Shakespeare, we've got Shakespeare's plays, and I'd recommend, if you could come across Greg Doran's Dimbleby lecture, absolute fabulous view of his view on Shakespeare and how the plays work. So, as a result of that, I was asked by the RSC to contribute to topping and tailing of their live stream of Henry the Fourth Part 1, which, you know, I think it does happen here, is a performance is streamed into cinemas to increase the audience. So one performance from Stratford was live streamed. If you went and saw it, yes, you would have seen me talking about material culture before the play. You might have just nipped out for popcorn at that point and missed it. But part of that was to think about a transect through Shakespeare's London, what it would have felt like, what it would have looked like. So this was, in fact, it was. You could regard it as Shakespeare's walk to work, his commute, which was actually my commute, but the other way around. So we've got some super sources from the period. We've got the Brown-Hobergen map from the period, 1660s. There's a debate about exactly what date it has, but we've got a great map. Any of you know London, London Bridge, Tower of London. The perimeter of the city something like that. Later on, we see the playhouses developing in the stews on the south bank, and of course Shoreditch, where a lot of the action is going on for Shakespeare. Same time as this map, we have something called the copperplate map, which is a much more detailed map of London, probably derived from the same source, but in bigger detail. There are 3 sections of the copperplate map. I think it's estimated there's probably 18 altogether, so we get these little snapshots of life in late 16th century London. This is the so-called Moorgate map, and you can see that's one of the ways into the city. There's the gateway, there's a city wall along there. There are lots of super activities going on out here. People are washing their clothes, drying, stretching textiles on tenter hooks, the doghouse. There's the city doghouse, archery. So we're going off into a rural landscape from the north of the city. So, but when Shakespeare lived in Silver Street, I'm afraid he's just off that map. But in Agas's map, we get a lot more detail and a lot more fulsome detail. So it's not just 3, it's the whole coverage of the city. So, if you look along the top there's the city wall, goes around there, city ditch, Barber Surgeons Hall, Silver Street, and Monkwell Street, charmingly called Muggle Street for all those fans of Harry Potter. And we know from Chris Nicholls' work that this is where Shakespeare lodged in 1606. So he's in Silver Street. This is his house. It's on the corner of Monkwell Street. This is the Utrecht panorama, which is less well known, but is the view of the city from the north rather than from the south. So St Paul's Cathedral from the other side originally had a spire, had a little accident with the plumbers in the 1560s, and you can start to imagine that Shakespeare lives about there. You can see there's a kind of a change in the environment. He's actually living in quite a flash end of town because there's quite a lot more open space. There are gardens, there are formal gardens, there are fields, so he's got a bit of, it's not far for him to go to stretch his legs. I'm afraid that's what it looks like now. So, yeah, I blame the 1950s planners. So Shakespeare's house on Silver Street doesn't exist anymore. Monkwell Street doesn't exist anymore. This is from a high walk which leads to the Museum of London, hence my route to work. So it's changed completely. There's an underground car park there, which is roughly on the corner of Monkwell Street going that way and Silver Street going into that primary coloured building beyond. So that's pretty much where Shakespeare lived in 1606. And they're ramped up from the underground car park. Sad, isn't it? And this is the site of St Olaf's Church, which was on the other side of the road. So there's some rather feeble remembrances of this in a small park. It burned down in 1666. It wasn't rebuilt, and then basically wiped out progressively. So there's an inscription on one of the little walls which talks about taking 8 foot off the perimeter of the church, and this celebrates the fact that it was burned down by the Great Fire of London, not rebuilt. And this, for me, is actually far more interesting because this is a pre-Blitz view of the same area. So St Olaf's was a little higher, a lot higher. You'd have to climb steps to get it. There's still an open space, because remember it's gone in the Great Fire of London. So this is Silver Street. Now this is Silver Street going down that way, and that's Monkwell Street there. So this pub is the site of where the Cooper's Arms is Mountjoy's house. So that pub will have sat on the foundations of Mountjoy's house that Shakespeare was a lodger within. Mountjoy, who have read The Lodger on Silver Street, made attires. He was a tire maker. So we have the one and only attire known to be still extant. This is a portion of a woman's headdress that would have held her hair and her bonnet together, and this is currently on display at the Museum of London, so there's another reason to go and look at it. It's the only one left in captivity, and this is what Mountjoy and his apprentice and his wife and his children made. And as you know, Mountjoy fell out with he basically reneged on a deal to do with a dowry, and which is why Shakespeare was drawn back into a court case in 1612. So this is the sort of thing that was going on downstairs while Shakespeare was upstairs in his lodging house. So if we think about his environment, he's close to the city wall. I'll just rewind a little bit, just to remind you, just see these bastions, which are medieval bastions to the Roman city wall. So, yet again, enemy activity revealed these bastions, the city wall, little covering of snow, which of course covers the fact that the Roman wall ran across there, but there's a nice close-up of Roman bricks that have been reused in the wall along with the hollyhock. So there is the physicality of Roman London on Shakespeare's doorstep. It's going on around him. That's our window from our Roman gallery, so you know, you're very close to it all. Salter's Hall, sorry, that's a little bit out of focus. Another area very close to where Shakespeare lived, which is substantially a Roman structure, which would have existed when he was there. Bear with me. And there are other Roman remains more recently have been revealed as a result of post-war development. So there's a large portion of the Roman wall, the city wall, which is in the same underground car park, which has been preserved in situ. A bit of a curiosity, because none of us can quite figure out why the Corporation of the City of London let go the parking revenue from 2 spaces to preserve a piece of Roman wall. Ordinarily they would have had no problem about demolishing it, because there was money at risk. In fact, if you look at this bastion, there's an access road to the left of it, which is our service road for the museum, which clearly the Corporation of the City of London knocked down in 1954, so we could build an access road to a museum. So there is a little irony about some of these levels of survival. We have the gateway to the western side of the Roman fort in a concrete box underneath the dual carriageway, which would have also been adjacent to Silver Street, where you can see people having privileged access to it. Shouldn't really be standing on the monument, but we have the origins of Roman London within the fabric of the area that Shakespeare lived in. Down the other end of Silver Street towards our Guildhall, we have another lost church, which is St Mary Oldenbury, which is that church there with no roof in this photograph. Another victim of the Great Fire of London, but also another victim of enemy action. St Mary Oldenbury was subsequently transported to Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri, leaving a gap with a Shakespeare monument in it. Just there, that's the site of the church. There's the church there, which, as we know, is where Hennings and Condell, the producers of the first folio, are celebrated, and they lived in that area. They were basically Shakespeare's neighbours. One turned up only last week, so I think its estimated value is £2.3 million at the moment. Nice to have it. Check your book, check your stacks. So we've got this kind of like fervent area of production, of thoughts about Shakespeare. Shakespeare's in it. People are compiling his work. People are printing. There is proof editing going on. So this is quite a creative quarter. A little further around the corner, we come across more Roman remains now that would have been possibly available for Shakespeare to see. This is the fort wall, Roman internal turret, which is recreated in the signage which celebrates it, etched on glass, only seeable when it's raining, so it's quite easy to see, and the remains of the wall. So we have a lot of Roman structures in the area, and this is what it would have looked like in Roman times. From the north, this is the gateway we saw a few minutes ago. This is more or less where Shakespeare's house was. That turret would have been just in that corner there. This is the long stretch of wall that we saw in what I call Salter's Hall, but also within the underground car park. So this is a reconstruction drawing, and this is Southwark on the south bank, which is where you arrive, and this is the port of Roman London. So this is about AD 250. Not as big as Rome, although we do have a substantial forum basilica and an amphitheatre, which compared to yours is very, very small. Our colleagues in Museum of London Archaeology have created a downloadable map which has layers, or if you want it, it is available as paper, with our major sites. So there's the fort, there's the amphitheatre, there's the Forum Basilica, that's our bridge over our bridgehead. So that's the wall around. So that's what would have been there towards the end of Roman occupation. And I just wanted to show you this because this is one of my absolute favourite Roman London resources, which is a downloadable map from the National Libraries of Scotland, who have scanned the late 19th century Ordnance Survey map, which is 5 foot to 1 mile. So the level of detail on it is fabulous. So Monkwell Street, Silver Street, that's where he's living, but it picks out all of the relics from a previous time. So it is late 19th century, but there's St Olaf's burnt down in the Great Fire and is marked on the line of the wall, and you can just see the bastion there. So we do have a little bit of a gap between the early Jacobean period and the late Victorian, but it is being picked up, it is there. So, I love this map, it's great, it's great. This is the city central portion of the copperplate map. So you've got this in effect transect that we're looking at that Shakespeare could have taken. Sorry, don't listen to my armpit. So all the way down to London Bridge there, Steelyard, the port of Rome of London, and all of this, and see how the density of housing changes. Up on the north side of the city, wide open spaces, packed in lower down. So this is where trade is happening. This is one of the places that Shakespeare has that potential contact for exotics. This is where things are coming from the Mediterranean. This is where trade is happening. We have port record books that shows that contacts are made with Italy, with Greece, with Cyprus, with the Lebanon. And this is where it all ends up. And it's ending up in warehouses on streets around a place that Shakespeare would have known. And if he's going on his transect or through his commute to work, I'll just proffer you some views of some of the churches. These, of course, are some of the chunky, substantial buildings that would have survived the Great Fire of London. Only as burned out walls. Their outsides would have been destroyed. But this is St Vedast in Foster Lane, which is a Wren church, but has chunks of its origin going on here. Here's a medieval doorway on the south side, which has subsequently been blocked up and may have been blocked up before the Great Fire of London. But see the way the stones have scorched ever so slightly pinky, that is a result of the Great Fire of London. But within that, yet again, we see Roman bricks. We see the fabric of Roman London being reused. Perhaps he would have taken his walk down one of these densely packed lanes that I showed you on the copper plate map. This is Bow Lane. Early one morning, this is usually full of commuters. So this is a rebuilt version of what Shakespeare may have known. Narrow streets, small shops, closely packed. If he descended Bow Lane and turned left and ended up at St Stephen's Walbrook, which yet again is another Wren rebuild, but see the raw masonry above Starbucks. Anybody suggest you should have Starbucks in Italy? Just say no, okay? Just want to make that point clear now, okay? Repel them. Coffee's horrible. So on the other side of St Stephen's, we can see two gentlemen propping up the wall who are busy building Bloomberg's new building, and this is all medieval masonry. You can see within that the tiles. This is one of these large slab tiles that would have been part of a hypercore system that have been reused. So you've got Roman masonry, you're on a route to work that Shakespeare could have taken if he was going from the Shoreditch side down to South London to the South Bank. You can see the remains now that have survived the Great Fire of London, the Blitz, and post-war development and more recent developments. So we have the fabric of Roman London that would have been clear to Shakespeare at the time. This talked about this at lunchtime to a gentleman from University of Essex. This is the London Stone. This is another curiosity that Shakespeare would have walked past. So if you look back at the come up there, just see London Stone. That's in Cannon Street, next to St Swithin's Church, and this is a peculiar fetish stone. So this is a stone that appears to have no use other than being a landmark, but is thought to be part of the governor's palace, possibly from the gatehouse. It is in a branch of W.H. Smith's, which is a stationer's and newspaper shop. It was in the back wall of St Swithin's Church, which is destroyed in the Blitz. It has no fundamental purpose other than a stone to tell stories around, and this is a view of it. It's a piece of limestone. This is taken from inside W.H. Smith's. There are stories that circulate about how this is part of New Troy, the city of Brutus. I may repel that because I do like a little bit of evidence. It was in the center of of Cannon Street at the time of Shakespeare. So this was actually, it was a place, it was a monument, it was a neighbourhood. So Shakespeare would have walked through the London Stone area. It's thought by some to be the centre marking point of the Roman city, as it was moved into the cupola at the back of the church in the 1780s. The church was bombed. We lost it for a bit, and now it ends up in W.H. Smith's. W.H. Smith's has been demolished. The London Stone has been looked after by the Museum of London, but there are stories, there are couplets that say that the London Stone, if the London Stone is to ever leave London, London will fall. So I have quite a responsible job not to make sure that London doesn't fall. Do you know how difficult it is to get an insurance valuation for a fetish stone? Quite hard. So we have this thing that would have been around during Shakespeare's time has a life now. It actually has an online life. It tweets. Yeah, seriously. The London Stone sends tweets. Says things like, please don't drop your coffee cups. Stop dropping chewing gum on the pavement outside. And yeah, seriously, he's got more followers than I have. There's nearly 1,000 people following the London Stone, and makes these observations about life in London, which I think is pretty cool, because you've got this thing that has possibly a pre-Roman London existence. It exists in the 11th century. We know that it has a part in Henry VI, part 2, Jack Cade, who's the Kentish rebellion. Shakespeare says, now as Mortimer, lord of the city, and here sitting upon the London Stone, I charge and command that of thy city's cost, the pissing conduit, run nothing but finest claret wine the first year of my reign, and there henceforth shall be treason for any that calls no other than Lord Mortimer. So, Jack Cade moves from Lord Mortimer. One of his sidekicks come in and says, hey, Jack Cade, and he's immediately struck down, because this is the point of change. So, Cade has taken, in Henry VI, part 2, control of London by appropriating the London Stone. So we have this fundamental thing that runs, as I said, from before Romans, through medieval times, up to now, into the tweeting age. So, obviously, Shakespeare is fully aware there are no other sources that Jack Cade sat upon the London Stone other than Shakespeare, I should stress. We are looking after the stone while the site has been redeveloped. We're still within the City of London, so hopefully the City of London will not fall while it's in the care of the Museum of London. I have problems here. So, Henry IV, parts 1 and 2, part of the action goes on in the Boar's Head Tavern. This is the sign from the Boar's Head Tavern, which is part of the Museum of London's collections, which is currently in the Globe, and come back to the National Libraries of Scotland scanned map from the late 19th century, which is my fallback position, and you can see that projection of where the Boar's Head Tavern would have been, which is just at the top of the approach to London Bridge, which Shakespeare could have taken a walk over London Bridge to visit the Grows or the Globe theatres, or maybe any of the stews or drinking establishments on the South Bank. So that's kind of like a view of where Shakespeare could have drawn some of his awareness of the physicality of Roman London, which maybe increases his awareness of what the Romans are about and the Roman plays. Because this is one of the things I'm quite interested in, is what do we see through his eyes? So just a quick overview of some of the documentary sources that he could have relied on. We have John Stow's A Survey of London, published in 1598 and then again in 1603. And within this, there are pretty much some nuggets that he could have picked on to increase his awareness. So within that, we have the Boudiccan revolt. So the death of 70,000 Romans and their confederates were slain. The city with Verulamium near St Albans and Malden in Essex, that are all famous, were ransacked and spoiled. So Stowe knows about the Boudiccan rebellion. He's writing it in a book that was available readily to Shakespeare. He then goes on to talk about the many cities and towns in Britain under the government of the Romans were walled with stone and baked bricks or tiles, as Richborough, Chichester and the Isle of Thanet, and he mentions a load of other places that we know have Roman collections: Sandwich, Verulamium, Silchester, Wroxeter, Kenchester, and Ribchester. So there is an awareness of where the Romans are coming from. And now Stowe then, in his survey of London, goes on to detail areas within the city. So top left, he talks about the east side of the churchyard in Lulsworth, now Spitalfields, which in about 1576 was broken up for clay to make bricks, and the digging thereof. Many earthen pots called urns were found full of ashes and burnt bones of men, to wit of the Romans that inhabited here, for it was the custom of the Romans to burn their dead, to put their ashes in an urn and bury the same with certain ceremonies in some field appointed for that purpose near unto the city. Every of these pots had in them, with the ashes of the dead, one piece of copper money with the inscription of the emperor then reigning. Some of them were of Claudius, some of them of Vespasian, some of Nero, and so on. Beside those many urns were many other pots were found, made of white earth with long necks and handles. Now this is what really gets really fascinating, because the long necked and handles, the white earthenware, is probably Verulamium ware, which is a known type. So he's describing material culture that we know what it is. These were empty, but it seemed to be buried full of some liquid matter long since consumed and soaked through. And he talks about glass, phials, and then he goes on to talk about other shaped pots, to me, that suggest on Nene Valley colour-coated wares. So we get this very true to life view of Roman inhumations in 1576. If you were familiar with excavations that the Museum of London carried out in Spitalfields, where diverse bones and inhumations from the Romans in stone coffins and pots were found, so in the same place at Spitalfields. So this is a known burial ground, and this is the first documentary source about that Roman burial ground to the north of the city. So thank you very much, John Stowe. So here are some other places that Shakespeare could have gained some of his knowledge of the Roman Empire. Abraham Ortalus's Atlas, which quite clearly delimitates the extent of the Roman Empire, readily available to Shakespeare. Those of you who know more about this than I do, there's a copy of Plutarch from 1579 for the lives of the noble Grecians and Romans, which could have also been another written source for Shakespeare. And Sir Thomas Smith was a political and legal theorist and member of Parliament who compares 16th century politics to classical Roman life, also readily available to Shakespeare. So, back to my favourite map. There are, as I said earlier, 3 pieces of the copper plate map. This is St Paul's, should have lost its spire in 1564. There was a conversation going on just before my start, which was how that view of London was changing at this period of time. And we know that in the Reformation, the dissolution of the monasteries, we see throughout London property development going on. And we know that Shakespeare buys into Blackfriars, the friary that is abandoned, dissolved there. He has property here, so this is one of the friaries. I'm afraid that's the only use I have for this map, because it just cuts off the rest of the monastic landscape to the north. So if we think about the city, we look Tower London, the outline there, we're going to go west a bit into that strip that connects the City of London to the City of Westminster, which is another place that Shakespeare would have been familiar with. This is Arundel House, which is next door to Somerset House, which is the London home of the Earls of Arundel, easy access to the river, lovely gardens, and we know that Arundel, Thomas Howard, second Earl of Arundel, was a big classicist. He was a big collector, and here's a view of him a little later in life by Rubens. Woo. And a view of some of his collection. So you get that view out over the river, which we've just seen from the map, and his statues that he's acquired on his grand tour. So this is possibly another source of material culture that Shakespeare could have chosen to look at. A portion of the Arundel collections we have in our collections, which is a marble frieze from Turkey, Prochensis, of a Medusa head, and you can see it in the Van Dyck painting just there. Continents of Scipio. So it's a little bit later, but like 1621. So it's beyond Shakespeare's time, but we have this awareness of maybe what a Roman soldier looks like. There's a red tunic and short swords and armor. This is an awareness that's commonly held. The frieze probably went next door to Somerset House when the Arundel collection fell into disrepair and before it went to the Ashmolean Museum, and this is probably why it appears here. It came from excavations on the site of Arundel House in 1976, which produced some more, basically pieces that were overlooked before the move to the Ashmolean, and more recently from a site in De Vere Street, which is on the other side of the Strand. We have this wonderful Roman tombstone, sorry about that, rubbish reproduction, but there is a lot of Roman sculpture in the area. And that, suffice to say, is one of the things we get at the Museum in London is a lot of material culture, Roman material culture that is found. We have something called the Portable Antiquities Scheme, so if you're walking on the foreshore or digging in your garden in London, you report antiquities, and this is a recent find of a Roman brooch that somebody has found on the foreshore. Now one could think, well, you would know if we're still finding Roman material culture that as chance finds, there must have been chance finds of Roman material culture during the 16th and early 17th century for Shakespeare to think. Anyway, that's about it. Any questions?